Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a good evening last night. There was a lot of good conversations going on at the opening night reception. So on behalf of Parsons, I am pleased to introduce Ontario Premier Doug Ford as the opening keynote speaker of our second and final day of P3 2019. Joining him will be Ontario Infrastructure Minister Laurie Scott. For more than 70 years, Parsons has been known as an unparalleled expert in the design and construction of critical infrastructure with a focus on innovation and successful partnership. Currently in Canada, we are delivering the Ontario 401 expansion project, Southwest Calgary Ring Road, and just a little less than a month ago celebrated the opening of the Regina Bypass. There is a tremendous amount of infrastructure underway in this country. But as the audience knows, Ontario is the largest infrastructure market in our country and the one with the most P3s in operation and under construction. What Ontario does and how it does it is closely watched by other governments and a great number of both local and international companies who operate here. Earlier this fall, Minister Scott released the province's highly anticipated project pipeline of 32 public infrastructure projects worth in excess of $65 billion. It is the largest commitment of P3 infrastructure in the province's history. Province has also created a new unsolicited proposal policy for infrastructure and is enabling IO to provide consulting services outside of Ontario. Two breakthroughs. In his speech today, Premier Ford will detail his government's vision for building a prosperous, productive, and globally competitive Ontario through targeted infrastructure investment and development. In particular, he'll discuss the role of IO and the province's private sector companies can play in stimulating interest in offshore investment and collaborative partnerships. Minister Scott, who was appointed to the infrastructure portfolio by Premier Ford in late June, will elaborate on the upcoming changes to Ontario's P3 program, based on the outcomes of the Minister's Market Sounding Initiative launched last year at this event. It's an honor to have them with us here today. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Premier Ford and Minister Scott. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the warm welcome, and Ruth, thank you. Boy, this is the crowd I love, infrastructure. That's what our government's all about. It's great to be here with my outstanding all-star minister, Laurie Scott. What an incredible job you're doing, Laurie. And Monty McNaughton was the former infrastructure. They had the two best jobs going. Who wouldn't want a job that you go around and hand out hundreds of millions of dollars and, what did we call it, Minister of Happy Days? Anyways, Laurie, you're an absolute champion, and our government's plan to build Ontario together. I'm excited to say our economy is absolutely booming here in Ontario. We've created the environment. I always say we create the environment. Government doesn't create jobs. For 250,000 people are working now that weren't working under the previous administration a year and 5 months ago. Matter of fact, previous administration lost 300,000 jobs. We have gained 250,000. My friends, it's very simple. When you lower taxes, when you cut red tape, when you cut regulations, that stimulates the economy. And when you stimulate the economy, more revenues are going up to the Queen's Park, as I say, the provincial coffers, and that's how we can support infrastructure projects. That's how we can support healthcare and education. And we've got a plan to build Ontario together. Over the next 10 years, our government is investing. These are staggering numbers. It's absolutely mind-boggling. $144 billion. That's $144 billion in strategic infrastructure projects. That's $90 billion of that is on transportation alone. An incredible investment is $67 billion in public transit and $22 billion in our provincial highway network. The balance is going to hospitals and schools, which also we always look at P3s on those as well. As part of our historic transit plan, we're making the single largest capital investment in new subway builds in Canadian history. And the $28 billion build that we're doing, what I understand, is one of the largest in North America, growing the existing subway network by more than 50%. And those that have lived in Toronto, you go on the subway, and we've seen that same subway map for 100 years. We're actually, it's really amazing. We're doubling that over the next 10 years. And we're working with all levels of government to invest, as I mentioned, $28 billion in 4 critical rapid transit projects. We have the Yonge North Subway Extension, which will connect people to jobs in Markham and Richmond Hill. We have the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension, which will serve more people in Etobicoke and connect directly to Pearson Airport. And they're one of the largest employers in the entire province. Maybe there's some people here from the airport, but they're quite excited. A long-awaited, improved 3-stop Scarborough Subway Extension. My friends, we talked about this 10 years ago. And again, the people of Toronto will understand this. There's a region in Toronto, for those visiting us, that have 650,000 people that have been ignored for decades when it comes to transportation. Finally, they're getting a subway. And the all-new Ontario line, that's our crown jewel, as we call it, which will break gridlock for riders from the suburbs into downtown. These projects will benefit people and businesses right across the Greater Toronto Area. The Ontario line alone unlocks $7.4 billion in economic activity, and Toronto residents will have access to 53,000 additional jobs that they didn't have before. But most importantly, building better transit is about making sure more people can get to work on time and get to home to their families faster, wherever they live in the province. Whether it's moving forward with the second stage of the light rail transit expansion in Ottawa, which we put $1.2 billion in, or starting construction on the Hurontario LRT next year. We're working to reduce travel times and create more transit options for everyone who lives in the province. Our government is delivering on an expanded regional express rail service through our Go Rail expansion program, which will deliver on 2-way all-day service with trains every 15 minutes. This program will use trains that travel up to 30% faster and save commuters 40 minutes every single day. So if you think of that, 40 minutes every day, that's equal to 3 weeks vacation. That's incredible, just on transit alone. And we're looking to our private partners to help us deliver on this new world-class network. But it's not only about getting people and goods moving, it's also about improving quality of life, unlocking new economic opportunities in communities right across Ontario, and creating good quality jobs by connecting people with places. It's why we're investing $315 million to build and upgrade broadband networks in rural and remote communities, communities right across the province. This is a fantastic example of how public-private partnerships can help us make smarter investments. Our plan will unlock private sector investments and generate more than $1 billion in broadband infrastructure improvements to build more, better, faster, to go further together than we have ever gone before. That's the power, my friends, of P3s, improving people's lives, encouraging innovation, creating jobs, and growing our economy, and maximizing the value of these infrastructure projects for the benefit of Ontario taxpayers. This is a province with endless opportunities that will attract some of the brightest minds in the world, like those in this room. My friends, I said earlier on, we created 250,000 jobs. The toughest thing that we find right now in Ontario, we don't have enough people to fill the jobs. As economic development told me, we need 200,000 more people in our province to fill the jobs. So all the brightest minds here from around the world, please stay. Please stay, bring family, bring friends, because we need people. We just need to give them an outlet to share their ideas. That's why we've launched a portal for unsolicited proposals. It's currently open to receive your best and brightest ideas for all things infrastructure, for transit lines, highways, housing, and broadband. We're one of the first provinces in Canada to do this. Building Ontario Together is about making communities commute short and making sure that we have a healthy community and run a government a lot smarter than what the government has run in the past. And it means taxpayers' dollars will make sure they go further. Many of you have come from around the world to be here in this audience today. My message to you is Ontario is open for business and open for jobs. As Premier, building world-class infrastructure is my top priority. Ontario is investing real money into these projects, and we're looking for great partners to make those projects a reality. Now I'll turn things over to my great minister, absolute champion, Laurie Scott. Laurie, come on up here and tell the world all the great things that we're going to be doing. Thank you.
Good morning, C2P3. How are you this morning? It's really exciting to be here today with all of you. And I'm not just saying that. This conference is basically the Super Bowl of the P3 infrastructure world. And I know something about that since I've been to 5 Super Bowls. It happens once a year, it's a big party, and the world's best players are here. And when it's all over, someone is going to dump a cooler of Gatorade on Mark Romoff. I also understand the halftime show will be one to remember. Who do we have this year, Mark? Is it Drake? Wait, it's me? I'm the halftime show? Well, if your idea of entertainment is an update on the Ontario government's reforms to the P3 program, let me tell you, you are in for a treat. But seriously, I want to take this opportunity to thank Mark Romoff and all the conference organizers for inviting me here today. I also want to thank the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, for speaking to this year's conference attendees and for his ongoing commitment to Ontario's P3 program. I've spoken to many of you at previous events about Ontario's commitment to P3s, but I think it speaks volumes that the Premier himself took time out of his busy schedule to come down here and address this conference. So Super Bowl jokes aside, I do want to recognize the significance of this conference. As far as P3 infrastructure goes, there is no bigger event on the planet. The people in the crowd today are the infrastructure world's best and brightest, and we know that they are watching Ontario closely. After all, Ontario has been one of the world's P3 leaders for over a decade. But as with all great success stories, we know that if we want to continue to be leaders in the P3 space, we cannot rest on our laurels. We must preserve what has made us successful, but also be open to change and improvement. That is what I am here to talk to you today about. 1 year ago, at the 2018 C2P3 conference, my predecessor, who's in the front row, Monty McNaughton, stood up on this stage and announced the launch of a new program, the Minister's Market Sounding Initiative. It was the first of its kind in Ontario. Our agency, Infrastructure Ontario, regularly conducts market soundings, but we as a government wanted an opportunity to speak directly to you, the people who invest in and build P3 infrastructure. We wanted to find out what has worked and what has not worked in Ontario's P3 program, and even at Infrastructure Ontario itself. When it was all over, we had met with over 60 infrastructure market participants from all over the globe and across multiple sectors. We met with equity investors, rating agencies, lenders, transaction advisors, lawyers, general contractors, subtrades, O&M managers, property developers, and international infrastructure agencies. We learned a lot. And some of the lessons we learned have already been put into practice. We heard that the market wanted more room to innovate. So last March in Berlin, Minister McNaughton announced that we would be giving more weight to design in the scoring of bids and taking steps to reduce the specificity of output specifications. We heard about how important the P3 pipeline is to the market. So in September of this year, I launched the first new Ontario P3 pipeline since 2017. It contained over $65 billion worth of P3 projects, the single largest investment in P3s in Ontario's history. I also announced that going forward, the market would receive pipeline updates not once per year, but 4 times per year. We heard that the market had great ideas for infrastructure projects that could improve the lives of the people of Ontario, but they didn't have anywhere to send them. So last month, I launched Ontario's first unsolicited proposals framework. And now, I would like to take a few minutes to tell you about our next round of changes. As the Premier just discussed, our government has made transit infrastructure a marquee part of our plan for Ontario. We have committed to 5 of the most significant transit projects for the Greater Toronto Area in a generation. The Ontario Line, plus extensions to each of the Bloor-Danforth subway line, the Yonge subway line, the Eglinton Crosstown, and the Sheppard subway. And all of these will be delivered using the P3 model. As most of you know, these will not be Ontario's first foray into the world of horizontal P3 infrastructure projects. In the market sounding, we heard about some of the lessons that were learned on the Eglinton Crosstown project and our recent LRT projects. I want you to know that these lessons have not been lost on us and that we recognize that if we are going to be successful in delivering our marquee transit projects, changes will need to be made. This includes changes to the risk allocation on these projects. So I am pleased to tell you here today that the government has a plan to address some of the key risks facing on horizontal infrastructure projects. The full details of our plan will be released by my cabinet colleague, Minister Mulrooney, in the coming months. But today, I wanted to provide you with a brief overview of 3 of the key elements of the plan. The first challenge our plan aims to address is utility relocation. We heard the market loud and clear. The difficulty with utility relocations caused significant delays on the Eglinton Crosstown project and remains a source of risk for our new subway projects. To reduce this risk, the government will be providing IO and Metrolinx with new authorities to ensure that utility lines can be expeditiously relocated while treating utility companies fairly. Additionally, IO would be looking at other ways of reducing utility relocation risk, including through improved mapping and the use of early works packages. The second key element of our plan relates to land assembly. We know that if we want our projects to achieve substantial completion on time, our P3 partners must have timely access to the land they need to construct stations, conduct tunneling, and prepare mobilization sites. Based on recent experience, we know that the current system for assembling project lands is not working. It is susceptible to delays, and the private sector's ability to mitigate this risk is limited. Therefore, our plan will include modernization of the province's authority to assemble project lands and minimize the prospect for delays in this process while still treating property owners fairly. The third element of our plan will be a modernization of the environmental assessment process. I can assure you that we as a government take our responsibilities to protect Ontario environment seriously, as I'm sure all of you do as well. But the current environmental assessment process system has proven cumbersome and the land assembly system susceptible to delays. We are also aware of weaknesses in the system that allow individuals to prolong the process long past the point that their concerns have received a fair hearing. It is possible to be diligent in both our obligation to safeguard Ontario's environment and our obligation to bring much-needed transit infrastructure online quickly. Our changes to the EA process in Ontario will respect each of these obligations equally. To be clear, we are not talking about relaxing any environmental protections. We are simply improving the speed and efficiency of the process. The three elements of our plan I have discussed today, utility relocation, land assembly, and environmental assessments, are not the only places we are making changes for transit projects. The rest will be detailed in the full plan when it is released soon. But these three areas were those where the market's voice was the loudest in seeking change. And I want you to know that we heard you. I would now like to move the spotlight away from transit projects and onto a different subject where our market sounding told us we needed to make improvements. Ontario's P3 program and infrastructure, Ontario itself. Now let me be clear, I have the utmost confidence in Infrastructure Ontario's ability to deliver an Ontario's ambitious P3 infrastructure agenda, but I know IO isn't perfect, and since it is one of the most important agencies in government, it is critical that it grow and improve. Moreover, some of the feedback we received in the market sounding were not criticisms of IO, but rather arguments that IO needed new tools in the changing marketplace. In fact, I'd like to start on that subject, new tools. In forms such as this, we sometimes use the term P3 to refer to a specific type of procurement or transaction structure. But of course, P3s come in many shades. Ontario has been very successful using a specific shade of P3 tools, and we will continue to use those tools that work. This includes a full-life approach to asset delivery, the use of private financing, and our suite of DBFOM, DBFM, DBF, and BF delivery models. But it is also time that we put other tools in our toolbox. In the market sounding, you told us about how such other tools have been used successfully in other parts of the world. For example, you told us about how the integrated project delivery model, or alliance model, of contracting can be used successfully on projects that feature significant interface risk to encourage the contractor and the authority to work together to find solutions to manage and share these risks. As many of you will know, we announced last month that Ontario will be deploying the alliance model for the first time on the Union Station expansion project. You also told us about other contracting models that we should have in our toolbox. These include alternate technical concepts, acceptable equivalence, and bundling. When designing future procurements, we will be open to considering whether these or other delivery models are the right tools to deliver infrastructure in Ontario. Another key theme we heard in our market sounding was the bid costs on P3 projects needed to be reduced. We recognize that there is a significant cost in responding to a P3 RFP, and that many in the market have been concerned that these costs have increased in recent years. We also recognize that without high-quality bids, our P3 projects cannot succeed. Therefore, I have asked Infrastructure Ontario to take action to reduce the burden of bid costs. These actions will include streamlining the way design presentations are conducted, reducing the number of required submittals where possible, being more judicious in the use of commercially confidential meetings, and ensuring honoraria are appropriate given the complexity of the project. I would now like to turn to a theme that was discussed frequently by my predecessor at past industry events, and which was one of the most commonly cited concerns in the market sounding: promoting a competitive environment on Ontario's P3 procurements. Promoting competition is not only in the public interest to ensure the people of Ontario get value for their dollar, it is also essential to ensuring the health and vibrancy of Ontario's construction and professional services sectors and the jobs that they create. In addition to the changes previously announced by Minister McNaughton, I have asked IO to take action to improve the competitiveness of our P3 market. This action will include removing prescriptive bonding requirements. We heard from several smaller contractors that these requirements were too onerous, and therefore were preventing them from bidding on projects. IO will also be conducting a review on the appropriate scaling of projects. Many participants in our market sounding told us that there has been a trend towards ever larger projects, which meant many smaller and newer market players could not participate. In some cases, a larger project may be in the best interests of Ontario, particularly where delivering a project in smaller packages could generate an unacceptable level of interface risk. But in other cases, the value of having more bidders able to compete will outweigh the benefits of a larger package. IO will be working to identify these opportunities and scale projects accordingly. We also heard a lot from the market sounding about the cost of disputes being burdensome, especially on smaller contractors. To reduce this burden, IO will be updating its template dispute resolution provisions to encourage quick settlements of disputes to reduce wasted costs for both parties. And there is one final theme I'd like to address today, and it was one of the most prominent to arise in the market sounding, and that is IO's approach to commercially confidential meetings and the project agreement negotiations. Now, I haven't sat in on one of these CCMs myself, but I am told that there is one word that could be accurately used to describe the experience: no. But jokes aside, there are good reasons why IO resists most changes to its template project agreement. The fact that the market knows and understands IO's templates has been one of the foundations for IO's success in the past decade. That said, we recognize that a successful agreement must adapt to market conditions and, above all, must be a commercially reasonable deal with which both parties can live. If it is not, disputes are sure to arise, and unnecessary disputes waste everybody's time and money. After discussing the matter with IO, I am pleased to advise that IO is actively pursuing a cultural shift of openness to commercially reasonable changes and innovation. That doesn't mean that future negotiations will be a free-for-all, but it does mean that reasonable arguments will get a fair hearing. Well, the time is almost here for me to release you all back into the wilds of the conference. We covered a lot of ground today, but I want you to know this: our work is not done. The truth is, our work will never be done, because the P3 marketplace, indeed the global marketplace, is a dynamic and evolving world. P3s are a means to an end. They are a means to building quality hospitals, highways, schools, and courthouses quickly and with due respect for the public purse. And they have a proven track record of successfully achieving these ends. But they are only as good as the people, processes, and transactions that make them real. And these things do not remain static. So I will make this commitment to all of you. Ontario will continue to listen to the people in this room who are on the front lines of delivering P3 infrastructure. Not because it sounds good to say up here on the stage, or because we like coming to this conference, though we do, but because a successful P3 means a place to care for our loved ones when they are sick, a new station for community policing, or a new highway to get people to work and school in the morning. Infrastructure matters, and so making sure Ontario is a world leader in delivering it matters to us. And I know it matters to you. So I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you for inviting me here today.